Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Madras Chamber, I welcome you all for this discussion meet on a very interesting subject. Let me invite our speakers to the head table, Shri.N.Venkatraman, Mr. Vaithishwaran, Mr. K.K. Shekhar, please. Thank you all for joining us quite early in the morning. Hope you enjoyed your breakfast. Before we begin the program, let me request you all to put your mobile phones on silent mode, please. These are, of course, exciting times for the nation, for the chamber, and we have a lot of sensational things happening in the last few weeks, whether it is GST, demonetization, and experts say this could also be the current topic we are discussing, could also be equally sensational, maybe. That I leave it to the experts to say. So the chamber has also been organizing meetings quickly to catch up, because we feel a lot of discussion, understanding is required on almost all these topics. Mr. Vaithishwaran, chairman of my expert committee, is here. With him we have started rolling out many GST discussion programs. We have had 2-3 successful programs already, and more are following. And today we have this topic to discuss, the entry tax judgment, recent judgment, and especially viewing it from the context of the GST, as well as our thought process for future about the federal structure. I mean, it has long-term implications, as we understand. So without much ado, we will start the program now. I request Mr. Vaithishwaran to set the tone for the meeting, please.
Good morning, friends. Madras Chamber is never found wanting when it comes to arranging meetings on current topics. So I think everybody was expecting a topic on meeting on demonetization, because that seems to be the only topic in everybody's mind. And whether it is social media or it is print media or visual media, that is the only topic which everybody discuss. And of course, you have panic setting in with everybody becoming an author of creative new ideas. Property passbook system, gold takeover systems, locker takeover systems. So there is definitely a phenomenal move that has happened, and that has got its implications as we go forward. It is just not the simple demonetization exercise. It's an attempt to clean the country and move from a state of lawlessness to legal compliance. I think it's a very welcome move in that direction. So much more things would follow. Harsher decisions will follow. It can also have its impact on GST. It can have a nasty impact on GST if things go out of control, because we are talking about the November 25th meeting getting postponed to December 2nd, the GST Council kind of meeting. And they were promising something in the winter session in terms of the budget, in terms of the CGST and IGST bills. Whether those bills even would be allowed to be presented if Parliament does not happen. That is a problem. Whether it's a money bill, finance bill is a different debate. But even if it's going to be a money bill, whether Parliament could function to allow the persons to present the bill can be a big issue by itself. So let's wait and watch. But coming to the current topic for discussion, many of you I see lawyers here, and as lawyers, we love to wallow and swim in decisions and enjoy the flow of decisions. And sometimes we also get upset by the fact that judgments runs into hundreds of pages. And we have one which almost just stops short of 1,000 pages. So I think even the magazines are yet to think of how do they handle this kind of an issue. So people are grappling with that judgment. But if you're a law student, if you're here, or if you like law, it's a treatise by itself. Please have the patience to go through the judgment. It opens up different concepts, different ideas, whether it is the Zakitlu case law, or the Dixitlu case law, or the Kesan and the Bharati decision, or the Pai Foundation, or even Lord Green's observations. You name it, it is there. And that from a concept of judge-made law, we are now even going to looking at a judgment which talks about inclusiveness. The judgment talks about economic unity and talks about how underprivileged states and not so privileged states, how they must come in terms with existing with other states, and how other states should also keep quiet in that kind of format. So a lot of things are flowing out of this judgment. And fundamentally what flows out is that non-discriminatory tax can be valid and states have all the powers. So that seems to be the effect of that judgment, except that major issues like whether entire state can be a local area or a local area is considered local area is passed down to the next match. There will be a second round of before the division bench which will decide all those things. Individual validity will also go to those respective benches. But key things which probably stand out here is, if state has got that phenomenal power and the levy, the judgment actually links the state's power to the overall constitution framework and the overall constitution as an entire document, and not confines it to a particular chapter dealing with tax, how does it flow in GST? What happens after the 101st constitutional amendment? Everybody, somewhere as professionals and lawyers, I think we are also keeping quiet, in the sense that the whole thing has been given to a GST council. In fact, the ADMK MP at the time of GST passage in the parliament said that power of the state is being taken away and given to the GST council. And everybody said that it is a fair argument, state's power has been taken away and given to the GST council. But I would put it even differently. I would say that even the centre's power has been taken away. Both of them have jointly sat together and Dharavatified all their powers to the GNC Council and say that you determine what is levy, you determine what is exemption, you determine what is the law. And that council also comes with something like a cess. They have no power to even contemplate a cess, but they're contemplating something like a cess. So you have an article which completely talks about GST Council, which determines the way forward, whether a state legislature will be bound by the recommendations given by the GST Council. Does the state have superpowers under Article 246A to do whatever they want despite what the GST Council says? And if they do so, whether it can be challenged? And if it can be challenged, whether this judgment will come into play?
Thank you, Mr. Vaitishwaran. You have said it right. Of course, the audience include members of the chamber and lawyer fraternity. So I didn't introduce Mr. Vaitishwaran thinking it would be selling coal to the Newcastle or நம்ம ஊர்ல சொல்லணும்னா திருநெல்வேலிக்கு அல்வா கொடுக்குற மாதிரி இருக்கும்னு. But however, maybe for few people who may be new for both sides, let me just quickly do that, though it's a bit late now. Sure. So I take it for granted that all of you know him. Anyway, as I said, he is the chairperson of our expert committee. So any more information about him, you can always approach the chamber. Thank you. He had set the tone right. Let me invite Mr. K.K. Shekhar now. K.K. Shekhar is again the co-chair of our Indirect Tax Committee, and he is the head of the Indirect Taxes in Ashok Leyland. He is an MA-BL and also holds a PG Diploma in Management as well as in Tax Laws. He has more than 2 decades of experience in the area of indirect taxation. He is a regular faculty in many institutes, including the Bharatiya Institute of Management, and also a regular speaker on indirect tax matters, both for the chambers, for Madras Chamber as well as other chambers. He was associated with Mr. Arvind Dattar, senior advocate, in the preparation of his book titled Central Excise Law and Procedures. Mr. Shekhar, can we have your usual style of presentation on this topic?
Of this discussion meeting. When Mr. Sankaranarayanan asked me to speak for 15 minutes on entry tax, from the industry's perspective, I was a little bit nervous because I will be a sandwich between 2 legal luminaries here. But I thought I could use this opportunity to fulfill my long pending desire. Those who are associated with the Madras Chamber of Commerce will know the love and passion both these senior advocates have to the chamber and also to all of us. I am competent to speak here only on one count, that I am elder to both of them. Mr. Vaidhi sir's contribution to Madras Chamber and also to all of us is extraordinary. Is extraordinary. So we are very, very thankful to you, sir. The other person is a senior advocate practicing in Supreme Court, but Nambaladam. Those who are, those who have passion with the Carnatic music, the December season, December 1st, in the Music Academy, or in Mylapore Fine Arts Club, na varsha Jesudasta. 25th na Nityasri Mahadevan. So whenever we have a program on All India, indirect taxes workshop we have every year, it will be on Friday and on Saturday. The next day, Saturday morning, first session at 9 o'clock will be Mr. Venkatraman's. That is voluntarily, he will extend the support to us. And similarly, when these types of developments happen and judgments are there, voluntarily he is here to help us. And most of us deal with senior advocates on the other part of the country. We know how business-like they are. But here we have two people. Their names are household names. So we are very, very, very grateful to both of them. And I would like to use this opportunity to honor them on my personal behalf and also on behalf of all of you. I request Mr. Datta, the Senior Vice President of Hyundai Motors, to come over here and do the same on my behalf, please. அது பெரிய மாலை. அடுத்த ரவுண்ட் மிஸ்டர் வெங்கட்ராமன் சார்.
அன்பன் சேகருக்கு மிக்க நன்றி.
Thank you so much. I thank on behalf of MCCI and on behalf of me also Mr. Datta for doing this. And it's very rare to see him also. He has moved to Delhi and now he's back and we are very close friends. Now I come to the subject. It is again like this. When during a festival season, movies of superstars or more than one star would be released in the same multiplex. Maybe Vijay or Ajit or Kamal Haasan or Rajinikanth, like that, Shah Rukh or Salman Khan. People, those who are very, die-hard fans of Shah Rukh Khan will be seeing that movie. There will be added bonus. In a multiplex la innuru theatre la Salman Khan padam irukum or Kamal Haasan padam irukum. So Rajini padam paakumbodhu there will be a trailer of Kamal's movie also. It's a bonanza for the audience. Adhu mari da first you heard Mr. Vaidiswaran and main person is Mr. Venkatraman. People will be very anxious to hear or to see these movies. Once on the trailer முடிஞ்சு விட்டு திடீர்னு தமிழ்நாடு அரசு செய்தி குறிப்பு நடுவில் ஒரு 2 minutes வரும். நான் எந்த நிலைமையில் இருக்கேன்னு நீங்கள் தெரிஞ்சுக்கணும். ஏன்னா ஃபஸ்ட்டு தே ஹவ் சீன் இட். அவர் ஜிஎஸ்டி என்ன வருமா வராதாங்கிறதே தெரியல. பட் எஸ் given a start and now you are going to hear a very informative and electrifying talk from Mr. Venkatraman. But my scope is, we will not go into the legal issues. I will just say for a few minutes as to what is entry tax as the industry has understood, what is the practice that we follow, what are the challenges which we face, and what would be the status of entry tax under GST. We are one of the few people who have entry tax assessments. The LTU and entry tax assessment are two different wings. நாங்கள் உள்ளே போகும்போதே வந்துட்டோம்ப்பா உள்ளே வெளியே அப்படின்வோம் கமர்ஷியல் taxes. They don't know what is entry tax அப்படிங்கிறது we don't face any problem at all in Tamil Nadu. என்ன என்ட்ரி எக்ஸிட்டா உள்ளே வெளியேன்னு சொல்லிட்டு அவன் பாட்டு ஏதோ even now assessments are pending for more than 10 years. CST assessments they completed in 13-14, but entry tax assessments are still pending. Tax on entry on goods into local area from an outside state. Entry tax is on motor vehicles. Entry tax is also on goods that the motor vehicles carry. Fortunately or unfortunately, I have association with both. We manufacture vehicles across the country, and they have to move from the manufacturing state to the consumption state. There is an entry tax point on the vehicles. Similarly, there are goods like tires, tubes and flaps and all. Those goods are also do attract entry tax, so there is an entry tax element. I am just quoting an example from automobile industry. There are refrigerators, other goods which are also covered under entry tax. Point of taxation, of course, entry into the state, and entry of vehicles or goods for consumption, use or sale. For each one we have number of decisions. What is consumption? What is use? What is sale? But of course, the objective is to the state government to augment their revenue to support the local welfare measures. People say that it is in the nature of a compensatory tax. So whether we have to compare the quantum of entry tax earned by the government and vis-a-vis the money spent, that's a legal issue that we will leave it. And it is not as if the entry tax is there in all states. We have entry tax only in some 7 or 8 states. Tamil Nadu, Gujarat and Bihar. And fortunately or unfortunately, Congress ruled governments or Congress ruled states, they don't have entry tax. The two vulnerable states where we have entry tax and all challenges are Tamil Nadu and Gujarat. You just see, they talk about ease of doing business, but we face problem in Tamil Nadu and Gujarat only. Of course, people also, those who deal with automobiles will know about this. In some states, the rates are equivalent to or lower than the VAT rates. In some other states, it is a very meager percentage of 1 or 2%. In Tamil Nadu, it is 12.5. It was equivalent to the TNGST rate, or VAT rate was at 12.5, so they had the entry tax rate at 12.5. But now VAT rate is 14.5. Somehow or other, they have retained the entry tax at 12.5%. In Gujarat, it is 15. In Bihar, it is 8. And we have entry tax in Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, Odisha, and recently in Uttarakhand. In all those states except Odisha has 2% entry tax. Chhattisgarh, MP, West Bengal, 1% entry tax. Now, there are two different methods followed. Wherever the rate is equivalent to the VAT rate or a percentage which is lower than the VAT rate, there they give set off against VAT. Wherever we have entry tax at 1%, 2%, there we have to pay the entry tax and we are empowered to collect it from the customer. This is the two different types of entry tax schemes that is being followed in the country. Now, how these goods are disposed under the tax treatment. If it is a local sale, entry tax is available as set off against the output VAT. If it is an interstate sale, entry tax is allowed to be set off against the CST payment. If it is used in manufacture also, credit is possible under the VAT scheme, but in all these cases, there are separate exemptions. If a trader brings goods from outside state and there is an entry tax, and if it is meant for resale, no need for payment of tax. Either it is local or CST sale. Or if the goods are likely to be used in manufacture also, there is exemption. It is like our industrial input, we need to prove. There is no specific forms that are produced. No. Stock transfer is a concern. You bring the vehicle and goods for trading from one state to another state where there is entry tax, and again due to business compulsion, you stock transfer, you need to set off. The entry tax originally paid is available for set off against the output tax payment. There is no one-to-one correlation under this, but in the case of a motor vehicle, we can identify between the entry tax paid initially and the entry tax set off with identification of chassis number, engine number and all. But in parts, it's very difficult. If it is for own use, for example, I manufacture a vehicle at Uttarakhand, bring it to Tamil Nadu, build body, use that vehicle for carrying our executives for work and home. It is for use. That entry tax is a cost and it has to be capitalized. Set off not available. Similarly, you bring a vehicle or even import a vehicle, do all testing, dismantle it. Entry tax is a cost. In these two areas, there is a cost element involved. I am just talking about from the business point of view, not on the legal thing. For destruction, trials, etc. Now, the challenges that we face. In Gujarat, very recently, they have taken two stands. The entry tax paid takes the character of VAT. You avail the credit. Then again you build the body, or due to business compulsions, the vehicle may be required in Karnataka. So it is transferred from Gujarat to Karnataka for sale. At that time, they ask us to reverse 4% VAT. Huge demands are pending on VAT reversal. They say, I think people with the TAFE also know about this. I am the focal point in Gujarat for all this. Nobody is coming. They will speak only in Hindi there. Issues, over assessments, they are taking it in Gujarat. This is first point. Next point, they say you bring the vehicle and then stock transfer. Set off is normally available. No, set off is not possible. For the fresh vehicles, you pay the entry tax separately, and when you stock transfer, claim it as refund. There is no provision legally in the Act. I don't know about the other this thing, so we are challenging that also. Like, valuation is again a problem. What is the value? Is it the stock transfer value, or up to the point, the place of business, the vehicles or goods reach, or at the entry point? The inclusion of insurance, freight, etc. on the value for the purposes of entry tax payments. If it comes to CST sale to an unregistered dealer, where in that state there is an entry tax, imagine. That person is an unregistered dealer. There is an entry tax. He is not going to sell. And I have to charge 14.5% VAT because he cannot give C-form. Therefore, 14.5% VAT and 15% entry tax. This is the distortion that happens in entry tax. Maybe we have not discussed about entry tax so far in all our presentation seminars. Then, classification disputes. We have it in Rajasthan. Parts and accessories of motor vehicles. Then, raw materials used in manufacture of finished goods. There is an exemption, and tires, tubes. All will attract entry tax which is equivalent to VAT rate. There is an exemption notification which says parts and accessories of motor vehicles and raw materials used in the manufacture of the final product which are intended for sale will be exempt from entry tax. But can you expect all the tire manufacturers to have manufacturing facilities in Rajasthan? We may have to buy tires from outside. They say tires, tubes, etc. are there in the schedule is separate entry. That will prevail over the general other two entries. There is no exemption notification for tires and tubes. Pay the entry tax. You are also not entitled for credit. So this is the distortions. And of course, you bring the goods here, store it, then again stock transfer to other places. There is an working capital impact. Bring the vehicles, pay 12.5%, keep it. After 6 months, again you transfer. 6 months, the money is locked. Where we do business in a state where entry tax is there. So these, only in 8 or 9 states we have the entry tax levy, and because of this, these are the distortions that we face in the existing system. Now, hopefully the industry wants the entry tax to be subsumed in GST if it comes. Again, suddenly there is a post this entry tax judgment that state with a limited understanding that state has powers to, constitutionally it's valid. Under GST, there was a proposal to support the manufacturing states by imposing 1% additional levy on stock transfers and interest rate. That has been removed. With this judgment, there is a view that wherever the entry tax rate which is equivalent to the VAT rate, that alone will be subsumed under GST, and in Tamil Nadu, in West Bengal we have 1%. There we pay and recover it from the customer. If you are not able to recover, you can recover it as entry tax. That is a cost to them. So if all the states, they follow this entry tax thing, they levy entry tax at 1%, what does it mean? 1% extra cost. Instead of 1% additional tax on the transfer out, they are going to charge 1% on in. So we do not know whether this 1% concept also will be subsumed under GST. That is our wish. Anyway, the industry has to, take it up with the government. With this, I think the time has come for me to exit and ask Mr. Venkatraman to entry in this. And of course, no entry tax exemption. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for your patient hearing. Thanks. Once again, I thank Mr. Venkatraman and Vaidiswa for this golden opportunity, sir, to share the dais along with them. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. K.K. Shekhar. You know now what I meant by his style. Of course, the shawl was not as usual. That's an added style. And don't worry, you had not been Tamil Nadu Saidi Kuruppu. You are equal to Shah Rukh Khan or Rajinikanth. Teaser. Oh, okay. And what he said about the senior advocate and Mr. Vaitishwaran is very true. The chamber also owes a lot to both of them for their untiring support. And I should add Mr. K.K. Shekhar also in the list. All the three present here have been a great support, knowledge support to the chamber, which I should acknowledge here. Of course, I don't have a shawl. Let us now move to the main subject. Let us now hear Senior Advocate Mr. N.Venkatraman's comment, because we just now had a helicopter view of the entry tax in a very well said way by Mr. K.K. Shekhar. So a lot of questions remain, as you say, what is going to happen in a GST scenario, what will remain, what will not, and what are going to change. So we will discuss that now. We will have the presentation from Shri.N.Venkatraman, and then we can have an open session. I have a very long introduction about Mr. Venkatraman, closer to the judgment, I think. The size of the judgment, not 1,000 pages, but at least. So I am just cutting short, just for the benefit of some of our members and for the pleasure of my doing that. I am giving a very brief introduction. As we said, he is a senior advocate, Supreme Court of India, and he is equally committed professionally as well as spiritually. And as he always says, his professional existence is to his senior and mentor, Sri C. Natarajan, senior advocate, and his spiritual commitment is because of the Sri Bharati Tirtha Sharada Pidam. And he has completed 27 years of professional practice in the fields of indirect taxation, direct taxation, international taxation, and other regulatory laws. He has so far appeared before 24 high courts and the Honorable Supreme Court on complex and very intricate issues concerning taxation matters of public and national importance. Most of the judgments having been reported widely, serving the best interest of the trade and industry. He had cases argued, had been many of his cases had been adjudged as the best case of the year by International Tax Review. He had argued cases laying down landmark rulings for the first time on issues concerning advertisement and marketing expenses for the consumer durable industry, foreign tax credits of those taxes paid outside the country available as credit in India, and in interpreting intricate provisions on double taxation agreements including involving various countries. He has done extensive work and research on issues concerning black money and has delivered talks and published news articles in leading newspapers and tax portals. I remember a year back, if I remember so, we had an exclusive thing where, surprisingly, Mr. Vaitishwaran and Mr. S.G. Prabhakaran, former president, was talking about demonetization at that point of time. I think it should have been 2 years back, 2011. That's the first time we started talking, and we also emphasized on that probably in the last program when we had a discussion on the black money, maybe in a different venue. Mr. Venkatraman has been closely associated in voicing the issues concerning the trade before the central government for many appropriate amendments and clarification. He was one of the leading counsels, that's important now for us, before the 9-judge constitutional bench of the Honorable Supreme Court, which heard all issues concerning entry tax. A bench of this size and stature having got constituted after 27 years in the field of taxation. I think with this I will leave the floor to Shri.N.Venkatraman. I invite him to tell.
My dear Madras Chamber, Madam Saraswati, Vaidishwaran and Shekhar, and my dear friends, before I proceed, I take the best blessings of my Guru, the spiritual Guru, the Saint of Shringeri. And whatever I am today, professionally, and I am able to stand up and argue 2 rounds before a 9-bench constitutional bench, I owe that professional existence to my Guru, my mentor, the person who continues to inspire me every minute in my life, my senior, Mr. C. Natarajan. I take the blessings of both of them before I proceed to speak to you. Let's imagine a situation where 2 young lawyers who graduate, say, from Nalsar, one reaching home in Chennai and the other reaching home in Bangalore, they join an office and they take their first month's salary. Both walk out to a bazaar and buy a new brand mobile phone. And each one keeps texting to the other the model. And to their surprise, it matches. And finally they ask, what's the price you paid? Then they keep knocking down the components of the pricing. Retail price is the same, discount is the same, warranty is the same, everything looks to be the same, except for the last bottom line tax levied by the local authority, local government. See, in Tamil Nadu, suppose you pay 12.5% and in Bangalore you pay 5%. So that's the shock of 7.5% difference, which possibly made them stop communicating further on that issue. So this is precisely something which we thought we can avoid post this judgment. Our entire endeavor was only one. Our agenda was only one. Will we be able to submit to the court when there can be a uniform rate of taxation in union levies? Whether it is customs, whether it is income tax, whether it is service tax, can we achieve a uniform rate of taxation in that? We used entry tax only as a window. This was the sole attempt, sole aim which the trade and the councils who argued for the trade wanted to pursue. Can we achieve a uniform rate of taxation? Can this judgment, which is one of the biggest benches after Mafatlal in 1990, after 27 years, and in the history, in the reported judgments, there are only, in the entire history of the Supreme Court, 9-judge bench has been constituted only 8 times. This is the 9th time a bench has been constituted of this size. So our endeavor was, can we achieve this uniform rate of taxation? But we failed. I should say we failed. And what is important is this. It's a very interesting experience when you argue before 9 learned judges who come from different states, who have undergone different political, social, environmental and judicial experiences. It's a very complex mechanism, and it's a wonderful experience for any counsel to comprehend and answer and pursue. You'll never know which question will be asked and from what perspective. It was such a wonderful experience. Let me make it very clear. A, we were heard very, very patiently. None of us were hushed up. 2, the understanding was extremely good because it was all the judges participated. It was a complete deliberation. 3, whether it went one way or the other, it doesn't matter. We'll come to that little later. whatever view that has been pronounced, either by the minority or by the majority, it had sound basis. You can't say because majority is against you, it lacks base. No, it has its own logic. It has its own reasons in a democratic setup. So the judgment, whether it is minority or it's a 7:2 judgment, 7 judges holding the majority and 2 writing the minority. And the minority judgment actually, out of 911 pages, 500 pages is by the minority judgment. 400 pages of 5 judges make up the majority judgment. So, but it's all with reasons. So the idea here is, which of the 2 reasons should have prevailed? That's all. Because both have basis. Which should have been the basis in the larger interest of the country? That's the only point of debate, or the only point which we need to discuss. So my endeavor will be to talk it in 2 parts. First, the tax part. What happened so far, and what could have happened, and what has happened. But more, according to me, after reading this judgment, the far-reaching implication post this judgment is going to be not just tax. What is going to happen to our federal system? Are we shifting our 70 years of commitment of a federal structure which leans towards a center, which says center is still all powerful? Are we moving from that axis? Does this judgment empower states? Are we empowering states with more autonomy, more power, and in the process, is it going to weaken our center? This is a matter of major concern. Spent considerable time this 10 days looking at the global philosophy of various federal governments, starting from US, Australia, Germany, Brazil, and everybody is paying a price everywhere by empowering states. It's not working. Even the most safest sound democracies have not found it very interesting. But one thing, after the recent American elections at least, I'm convinced there's nothing called a sane democracy or an insane democracy. There are only saner moments in democracy and insaner moments in democracy. It happens. It's a cycle. So this churn will now happen post this judgment, and what are its implications? These are the 2 things which we need to necessarily understand. Now let's talk of entry tax first. Before we come to this judgment, the scenario in India prior to 1995 to 2016, and post 2016, we can put it in 3 buckets. Prior to 1995, it was a free batting. Any state can have, they can do anything with their local sales tax powers. You want to tax, you want to tax. You want to grant a holiday, you want to give an incentive, you want to close down an industry, you want to harass through a higher rate of taxation, you are given the freedom. Nobody could question anything. Because you had the state autonomy. The concept of federalism is only that. It says 2 important points on federalism is this. A, it's not something which is defined by any legislation. It sprouts out of the Constitution. That's the first route which we should pick. It sprouts only and from out of the Constitution. And 2, it can be interpreted only by the Supreme Court Constitutional Bench of minimum 5 judges. So they alone can define what is federalism. So they have said that yes, it is Constitution which divides the powers between the union and the center, and on such areas where powers are marked for the states, they have complete sovereignty and autonomy. You can't have an overarching control over those powers. This is exactly what has been defined so far as federalism. But they made it very clear, whenever there is a need for a superintendence, there is need for a supervision, there is need for an approval, need for an endorsement, need for a validity, and if the Constitution conceives such a mechanism, then center will do it, and therefore we lean towards the center. That's exactly how this the federal structure has been defined and designed in India through judgments. So 95, up to 95, no questions. Between 95 and 2016, we started to integrate ourselves, taking into account the global business which invaded into India, the globalization. So we thought that we should have a uniform market even at the last mile lap. So the need for bringing a VAT legislation, it started in 95 and it culminated in 2005. So VAT legislation basically encouraged a convergence of three aspects. It wanted to achieve a uniform tax rate, even though it didn't. And it was persistently saying tax holidays and incentives should go. And it was saying that local states should not use CST and grant CST exemptions. It's going to play a havoc manufacturing or non-manufacturing states. These are the three major attempts which 95 to 2005 successive governments through the Empowered Committee tried to do it. The only difference was Empowered Committee was not a constitutional body. So it had ministers, state finance ministers, but it still did not have the power to enforce. So it's only writing letters, politely asking people to follow. When states started to align slowly from 95 to 2005, the revenue started dropping. And therefore, there was a need to impose entry tax by major states. See, if you see the history of entry tax, even though we had a judgment in 54 and 50 and Atiyabari, automobile, nothing happened for 40 years because they were all on motor vehicles. There was not an actual entry tax. You started to get into this concept of entry tax only around 1995 because the drop in revenue, there is a compulsion to follow. Every minister meets every month in a meeting and they keep on saying you are slapping an extra tax on me. We are two neighbors and we are trying to fight on each other. So some adjustments, political alignments, all these started happening. So there came an entry tax. So this is the reason for entry of the entry tax into the system. Even though Constitution gave a power, even on day one, for the states to do it. So this was what was happening between 95 to 2005. Now from 2005 to 2016, post the VAT, we were talking about GST, where we wanted to integrate both the central tax and the state tax into one bucket. That's a major step because it's a question of both the union and the states trying to give up their powers and work in a consortium, which is very difficult under the constitutional scheme of things, because power of taxation is power to fetch money. So are you ready to yield? So it's a question of trust. It's a question of mutuality. It's a question of trying to give and take. But after enough of ups and downs, we reached a stage in 2016 when exactly the matter was about to commence for hearing. We reached a stage where states were ready to pass this GST bill. Because, interestingly, GST is not something under the concurrent list. All of us should understand. It's a very unique power under the Constitution. It doesn't fall under all the three lists. If you struggle to find an entry for GST, you will not find an entry under the list 1 or list 2 or list 3. It's there in the article itself. It's one rare article which combines the power and also the subject. They did not put it in any of these lists. So what have they said? Both in a concurrent list, both have simultaneous power. But if somebody both of them exercise simultaneous power, they should be able to coexist. In case there is a conflict, then center will prevail. There's no such thing in GST. Both will do it together at the same point of time. So this is the convergence which we have reached after 2 decades of struggle. Different political governments and irreconcilable political differences and elections happening at different points of time for different parts of the country. In spite of all this, we realized that we can't afford to be indifferent in our in imposition of taxes under the state law. That's something which message reached out very clearly across India. Otherwise, there was a lot of delay in bringing the GST bill. The moment it was brought, within weeks, we could get the 3/3 majority assent which we wanted within 3 weeks. And a state like Bihar, which is definitely not with the central government today, was the third state to approve it. So people or even politicians started to look at the economic perspective of India much better. They were looking at trades. If we don't hook ourselves into this wagon, we will be then left isolated. That was the message which went on. So this is the development from 95 to 2016. We have reached now, and we are now struggling whether this GST Council will meet, whether the IGST Act and CGST Act will get passed in the winter session, whether there's going to be a money bill or finance bill, whether Parliament will sit even if it's a money bill. All these questions are coming up because of a different political reason. But this is the development. In democracy, like it's like a monsoon. It keeps changing. Something can erupt somewhere and then it can go for a hit. GST has suffered that. It has always in the roller coaster. Sometimes it comes out, then puts under ventilation, goes back to the roller coaster. This has been the nature of this 7.5 Saturn, I think, for GST. So because we have to have fusion of two federal partners. So this is the scenario. Now we stand before the 9 judges. And this is what we said. Now politicians have reconciled. They have started to look at a better India. They have started to look at unified India. They have started to look at the economic unity of India. That's exactly the dream which is embedded in Part 13 of our Constitution. That's the only part. That's the sole part in the whole Constitution which integrates unions and state with one thought process of an economic unity. You don't find it in any other part of the Constitution. So economic unity is something, a dream. It's a constitutional, it's not a fundamental guarantee or any such thing. It's a constitutional dream. Can we have one unified India? So we said we have achieved that unified India through this GST bill. Therefore, we persuaded the court, it is true that the matter has come back because it was referred in 2008. After 8 years, it has come for hearing. So should we hear this matter at all in the interest of the unified economic India which politicians have achieved? That was one question. Negative. We said, no, we will hear the matter. 2, we said, whenever there is a need to hear, a reference comes out of, why should you don't go to a 9-judge constitutional bench straight away. Because of conflicts, because of conflicting judgments, then you go. Now, what are the 2 conflicting judgments which conflicted, if at all, with Attiyabari and Automobile is Bhagat Ram and BCCI. When I say BCCI, it is Bihar Chamber of Commerce, and not because the chief who heard both the BCCI matters every time assured, I think you are referring to this BCCI or some other. So it is Bihar Chamber of Commerce. So these 2 judgments hit a discordant note from Attiyabari and Automobile. They said, no, you can't have a sort of a semi-control and all. State is empowered to do anything. It loosened the doctrines of these 2 judgments. So what we persuaded the court was, look at these 2 judgments. Apparently, they need not have decided this issue at all of entry tax. For the reason, in Bhagat Ram, there is a finding that entry tax was not an issue. It was not canvassed. It is clear that entry tax was not an issue. And as far as Bihar Chamber of Commerce, they have already obtained the presidential assent, which was the requirement under 304B. The whole case was whether president should assent or not. So, whereas factually they have assented. So we said, where was the need for a conflict? So why should we decide this? Let's drop. This was the second suggestion to the court, rejected. The third suggestion was, we have reached this 2016 GST era. So even if you want to hold a view, why don't you sustain the earlier view which held the fort for 70 years, rightly or wrongly? Should we now meddle with this at this point of time? Because 70 years we have treaded one path. So uniformity and consistency, though not a virtue in jurisprudence, can you still do it? Considering this fact, rejected. And therefore we fell into the fourth option of arguing the matter at length and also losing it squarely through a majority of 7:2. Now what has this majority said? That's important. This is what they say. A, whether tax should be read as a restriction under our constitutional scheme. That's the question. We produced evidence from the Constitution that there are several types of restrictions under the Constitution. In fact, the minority brings it out very clearly. His Lordship Justice Chandrachud says it's in the following buckets. You have restrictions in the form of abstraction of power. Powers from the states were taken out and given to the center. That is how CST came. That's how entry 92A came. It's a form of abstraction. Powers in the form of eclipse. When it comes to Article 253, it's the central government which can enter into a treaty with various countries. And it can enter into a treaty with any country, even agreeing for an exemption of a local VAT through a treaty. Whereas state of Tamil Nadu or state of Karnataka cannot enter into such sovereign treaties. So eclipse, when you go for an international agreement, it's the center which can voice the view of the states. So you have such a power in the form of eclipse. 3, if you read Article 286, there are several restrictions in terms of the declared goods. In terms of Article 286(3), where in terms of works contract and transfer right to use limitations, even though never limitations were ever prescribed. So these are all things which flow from the Constitution. So there has been a restriction embedded in various forms in the Constitution when it comes to it. So it is not that there is a free batting for the states. States are subject to a few things, limitation. This was shown. The court now says, very well, but such a restriction is not so explicit in Part 13, and therefore we will not read it for Part 13. They nullify all these theories. The majority nullifies all these theories by saying that we don't see such an explicit restriction in Part 13, and therefore we will read it so. Now, as I said, what is the basis for these two minority and majority judgment to flow? Both of them picked up the same route. The route was, you must interpret it textually and you must interpret it contextually. That's one of the modes or the tools to decide a constitutional law. When you deal with a constitution, you have to necessarily factor, like we have harmonious construction, we have liberal construction, several forms of interpretation. One of the important forms of, one of the tools which you need to necessarily use in interpreting a constitution is the tool of a contextual interpretation. Now, what do you mean by a contextual interpretation? The majority says, we will read the contextual interpretation by looking at the constitutional debates only. We will not progress beyond 1950. We will read those debates. We will see the historic, we will go back. We will see what history says before that. And whatever historical capture the constitutional debate has made and the provision under Part 13 has been brought out, that will form the basis for interpreting the law in 2016. The minority disagreed. The minority said, we will also follow the same contextual interpretation. And Supreme Court several times has said, Constitution is not a pedantic document. It's a document with life and spirit, and therefore it has to move with times. Therefore, we will have GST as the basis in our mind when we declare what we feel Part 13 is going to be. See, this textual and contextual interpretation means a lot. It's not something new to the Constitution. In fact, there are many lawyers here. So all of you should read Mahabharata if you want to be a successful lawyer. It's the epic which puts you a clear understanding of perspectives. You should read it. If you don't have the time to read it, at least watch the 267 episodes of Mindu Mahabharatam. It brings out, for a common man, it brings out so beautifully. It's so logic. It brings out this contextual interpretation in this way. See, when war is about to begin, there is a presumption by the Pandavas that because Krishna is on their side, they can win Kauravas in no time. Krishna says that's wrong. 3 people cannot be conquered: Bhishma, Drona, and Karna. Because they are direct disciples of Parashurama, who is an avatar. If you have learned skills from an avatar, you are yourself indestructible. That's one of their theories. So they can't be destroyed that easily. They have to surrender themselves to death. And if they decide to die, then you can kill them. But you can't kill them otherwise. And Krishna persuades each one of them to give up their life. He goes to Bhishma and says, you stuck to Dharma. No doubt about it. But Dharma is not the end route of life. Even Dharma has a taproot. Karunyam, or compassion. You failed to be compassionate in the Draupadi scene. You did not show the compassion. You stuck to your Dharma of Hastinapura, and therefore you should surrender your life. He came to Drona. He said that, look at this. You are one of the best teachers. When you taught Arjuna, you never thought that you are teaching a third person. You were so possessed about his abilities and you wanted to nurture him and you brought him up. But when you did this to Ashwatthama, you had the passion of that you are doing it to your son. You should have left your son to me. You did not trust me. You trusted your skill sets via your son. And in the process, every of your decision making has been aligned based on your son's priorities, and you have therefore joined the group of Adharma, and therefore you must give your life. When it came to Karna, he said that you are one of the best archers in the world, without a doubt. Your skill sets are unquestionable. But Duryodhana is able to commit all this adharma only because he is able to sit on your shoulders and shoot. You have given him that right. And therefore, the moral is, you are a characterization in this epic only to signify, contextually, you have to communicate to the world, however efficient you may be, however good you may be, however meritorious you may be, if you are going to be on the side of adharma, you are going to sink. It will take you to the road of ruin. So, now what are these debaters doing? They are taking this context out. And they are doing the Patti Mandram, whether Arjuna is skillful or Karna is skillful till the cows return. You will never find an answer. So context is very important, whether you read an epic or you read a constitutional provision. So both the judges, the minority view and the majority view, took context as the basis. Only difference, the majority said we will stick with the constitutional debates. Whereas the minority said we will progress further. We will take GST as the basis in our mind as we interpret the law. And therefore, the minority said we will read tax as a restriction. Why? We don't see anything explicitly in part 13 excluding taxes as not being a restriction. Where is the restriction? It says any law. Article 302 says any law. Any law, does it exclude a tax law? Any entry, does it exclude a tax law? So we don't see any exclusion anywhere. And why should we therefore say tax is not a restriction? We don't agree with the majority. So this was the first point of difference. Now, the second point of difference is, as a result of when you don't read tax as a restriction, what happens? The second point is, this judgment now says, the majority, state is free to impose its own rates of tax. 22 years of struggle. And we have reached some sort of a alignment and an understanding that we will not fight on rate war. Now this says, you have absolute power. You can do whatever you want to do within your domain. You can put any rate of tax you want. Discriminatory, I'll come a little later. Tax. 2, you are entitled to give tax holidays. You are entitled to give incentives. All that you have to show to the court, if it comes for an experiment or a test, is, well, this was justified in a given circumstances. Because my people are important to me, they have to come up in life. So, this is the major issue causing concern now in the GST scenario. What does it mean in effect? What does it mean in effect? See, what are these two, majority and minority? Which are the tools? Next, after the contextual interpretation of constitutional debates and GST as the basis, the second, we go a little deeper. The constitutional goal is economic unity. That's the fulcrum. Part 13 says there can never be a trade wall, a tariff wall, or a high rising tax rate to put it as a to restrict a free flow or passage of goods and services within the country. That's the central theme of Part 13. So it says it has to be free flow, subject to such restrictions which does not create it as an impediment. Now, this judgment now says you are entitled to create your own sovereign, with your use of your sovereign powers, you are entitled to give your own tax holidays, your own incentives, your own schemes. Now, will this gel when ministers meet in a GST council? That's the concern. This concern is, now I was talking of the concept. What is the second concept? Economic unity. In economic unity, that the majority versus the minority, it divided themselves in this bucket. The minority preferred the view as a votary of free trade. It is free trade which promotes growth. That was the theme of the minority judgment. You grow. What is growth? Growth is by growing. Growth is not by taxing. That's the minority view. How do you define it? This was the example we cited before the court. See, in an entry tax on a capital investment, see, we are talking in a GST scenario. Why are we moving to destination-based state? Because the capital should flow easily. The credit along with the capital should also flow easily. That's the whole idea. We have moved from a origination-based of tax to a destination-based of tax. Now, what do we mean by this flow of credit? Suppose somebody is bringing a telecom equipment worth 1,000 crores into a state. You put a 15% entry tax on it. This was the question we placed before the bench. Will you like an entrepreneur to have 1,000 crores in his hands